This is StoryBeat, Storytellers on Storytelling, an exploration into how master storytellers and artists develop and build brilliant stories and works of art that people everywhere love and admire. So join us as we discover how talented creators of all kinds find success in the worlds of imagination and entertainment. Here now is your host, Steve Cuden.
Thanks for joining us on StoryBeat. We're coming to you from the Center for Media Innovation on the campus of Point Park University in the heart of downtown Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. If you like this podcast, please take a moment to give us a rating or review on whatever app or platform you're listening to. Your support helps us bring more great StoryBeat episodes to you. My guest today, the multi-award-winning lyricist Debra Gussin, discovered her passion for music at the age of 12 when her mom took her to her first Broadway musical, her sister took her to her first concert, and all that music took her to another universe altogether. Though her career would first lead Debra on a journey through television, music was always along for the ride. After working on the Mickey Rourke film Year of the Dragon, she landed at ABC's Wide World of Sports. That compelling show involving the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat taught Debra the ingredients of how to tell a compelling story. Debra continued her TV career in Los Angeles, working on numerous programs, including the Daytime Emmy Awards, Fox Sports News, Wolfgang Puck, and Dr. Phil. While working on the launch of the National Geographic Channel, one of Debra's colleagues introduced her to renowned lyricist Marty Panzer, whose songs have been sung by Barry Manilow, Barbra Streisand, and many others. That life-changing moment unexpectedly launched her into the world of songwriting. After winning the Concord Records and Barry Manilow Songwriting Scholarship 4 times, Debra focused her energies on songwriting full-time. She has since gone on to win 40 international songwriting contests, including the Grand Prize and Lennon Award in the prestigious John Lennon Song Contest. Her songs have been heard on NPR radio and have been featured on numerous TV shows. Debra was named Best Lyricist at the 2016 and 2017 Hollywood Music and Media Awards. That was the first time that group ever honored a lyricist. She recently wrote rock songs with Weezer's Brian Bell for his band, The Relationship, and continues to focus on writing songs for the pop, adult contemporary, country, and dance markets. So it gives me great joy to welcome my longtime friend, Debra Gussin, to StoryBeat today. Debra, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Steve. I'm honored to be among the esteemed people that you speak with.
Well, believe me, the honor is all mine. So I know that you've been a music lover since you were a little girl, that's for sure. What kind of music first inspired you? I know we said in the intro here that you had been inspired by going to Broadway shows and concerts, but what kind of music inspired you?
You know, I grew up in the heyday of singer-songwriter. The singer-songwriters like Carole King and, if you call him a singer-songwriter, Bruce Springsteen and Billy Joel and Barry Manilow. And the 70s was a real lush pot of musical ingredients for me in terms of storytelling and musicality.
People like James Taylor, did you like?
Yes, absolutely.
Great. Carole King, all those folks were in your wheelhouse, so to speak.
Yes.
And so many artists like that, singer-songwriters, think of music as a calling. Do you think of music as a calling for you?
Well, my expertise is more lyrical than musical, although I do, when I'm in a co-write in person, I do sing what I'm hearing. But I do try to collaborate with people who have more of an expertise in melody than I do. But I don't know that I look at it as a calling. I mean, I've had another calling in my life as a television producer, so I think there could be more than one calling. I think creativity is a calling, and sometimes I would put it into producing TV, and sometimes I would put it into songwriting, so maybe that's a little more accurate.
Were you writing songs while you were working in TV?
For a little while. I had never had any aspiration to write songs. My writing growing up was a little poetic, but I never considered myself a poet or sat down and wrote poetry. I just, people would ask me to write things for eulogies and things like that.
For eulogies.
But I never really sat and considered myself a poet. It wasn't until I met Marty Panzer and I took his master class in lyric writing that he saw something in me that I did not know about. And it was 100% him being very encouraging over the years that I ended up becoming a lyricist, because I was just kind of doing it for fun when I first took his master class.
Has he ever told you what specific thing he saw in you?
Yes. He says, I always knew you were smart, but I didn't know at first whether or not you could get down to the heart. And he said, as I've seen you grow as a lyricist, I have seen that you absolutely can do that. And so I think that to him, and the way he writes as well, is just right inside the heart. And I don't know if I've inherited that in a way from him, from listening to his music as I grew up, or whether or not I just had that in me as well. It's probably some of both.
So when you first started out, you were writing more mechanically? Is that what you mean?
I was trying to figure out what a verse and a chorus was when I very first started to take his class. Like I said, I took the class more because of my interest in the songs that I grew up that he wrote for Barry Manilow, who I was a fan of most of my life, and I just was a fan of his writing, and I didn't take the class because I wanted to be a songwriter. If I wanted to be a songwriter, I would have started in a beginner's class,
right.
Songwriting 101. His was a master class with people that were very experienced in writing, especially my first year when I took it. Everybody was very good. So I didn't even know how to write a verse or a chorus. It took me quite a while to figure out the technical part of it.
And you got to take this class because you'd met him and he saw something in you.
I took the class. I had met him right before 9/11 through a mutual friend that I worked with, who found out I liked Barry Manilow, and he asked me if I knew who Marty Panzer was, and of course I did. And so he got us all together for dinner. And I remember the dinner went on and closed the restaurant, and for another 3 hours we were all standing outside laughing.
Wow.
Because he was the funniest person I'd ever heard, and I thought, gee, isn't this interesting? I'm never going to see this guy again, and yet he made me laugh more than anybody ever has. And a year later, a friend of mine was looking at the UCLA catalog and mentioned that guy I had dinner with was teaching his class in songwriting and in lyric writing, and I thought, well, I don't write songs, so why are you telling me this? And then 9/11 hit, and his class was taught in January, so the whole kind of country, especially New Yorkers, were very down, and I thought, I could use a good laugh. Maybe I'll take his class, and at least I'll laugh and learn something about the songs I grew up with. And that was my only agenda.
That's very interesting, that you sort of fell into it without looking to do it.
Completely.
And do you feel that once you found, let me put it this way, was there a moment where you went, wow, this really is for me?
To this day, I wonder what I'm doing. But it feels like the very first time I tried to sit down and write a lyric, I remember saying to somebody in the class, I didn't know Marty was standing behind me. It was after the class was over. And I said, boy, this must be easy for him, but I'm finding this so hard. And he heard what I said, and he said, this is not easy, even for me, even after all these years. And now that I'm many years into it, it really doesn't get any easier for me. Some people might be gifted at it, and it might roll off their tongue, but I have to work very hard at it, and I am a big rewriter.
Well, I've been writing for a long time in my life, including, as you well know, a number of lyrics, but I've not been in the lyric writing mode for some time, and any kind of writing is extremely difficult, any kind, even for high-end professionals. But lyric writing is especially challenging. Why do you think that is? What makes lyric writing so hard?
Well, a story writer can sit down and write a story and compose a story in their head and just tap, tap, tap on the keyboard and pull out a story. But a lyricist has to write that same story in, a certain number of, a very few number of words, and they all have to rhyme, and they have to have internal rhymes if you really want to do that. And then it has to go to a chorus that makes sense coming into and out of again by telling a whole different story or progressing the story. Mm-hmm. And the more you know, when I first started out, I was just trying to figure out how to write a lyric. But the more I studied and learned about the industry and what was demanded of professional lyricists, the more I edit myself along the way, which they say you're not supposed to do. They say just write it all down and come back to it later.
Right.
But I think, oh, that's not good enough, or that can be better, or that needs to be stronger. And so I have to remind myself to just put it all down on paper and then come back to it and see what sticks out.
Well, because one of the things that we teach as in writing classes is that you do get it all down as much as you can, as quickly as you can, and that the part of the art of it is coming back and rewriting. I assume
Right.
you do a lot of rewriting, yes?
Yes. I'm a big believer in rewriting, and in a lot of various workshops that I take and things that I'm exposed to, especially down in Nashville, it's about being fast and about writing as much as you can, and quantity, obviously quality too. But I prefer to focus on the quality, and I'll rewrite a few songs over the course of time. Somebody else can write 50 songs, but maybe only a few of those songs are high quality. And I don't think you can write 500 songs a year and they can all be great.
Oh.
But I could write 5 great songs a year if I keep rewriting them.
Yeah, sure. I think that there are plenty of writers, both songwriters and writers of other kinds, that write lots of stuff that doesn't work, and they're just looking for that one nugget in there,
Right.
or 1 or 2 or 3 nuggets, hopefully. I can tell you from my own experience, that's true for one of my former partners, that wrote a lot of stuff that just wasn't going anywhere, but was looking for that little truffle in the dirt, and it is a challenge to figure out what does work. Do you know when you've written something? Do you feel it that this works? How do you know?
Well, that's why I continue to take workshops, because I do like the opinion of other professional writers.
Mm-hmm.
They give me a direction. They tell me if something is a little too cliche. And when I'm too close to it, especially if I don't take breaks in between, or if I have a deadline and I have to write something quickly, I get too close to it. And unless I put it away for a while and come back to it with fresh eyes, those fresh eyes would come in the form of other writers who can look at it. Because I can look at somebody's lyric and tell them all the things that they can do to improve it. But when it comes to my own, if I'm in the middle of writing it, you lose that perspective. I do enjoy having other professional writers give me that perspective.
I think that is a great way to look at things. It's always helpful to have, especially people that know what they're doing, give you feedback, because you do sometimes lose sight of the forest for the trees, that old cliche. But
right.
And it's certainly going to be as true in lyric writing or any kind of music writing as it would be in any kind of writing. Aside from doing, writing hopefully a lot, are there other things that you've done in your life to develop your writing talents? Do you read poetry? Do you do other kinds of things?
I know I should, but I don't do things for the purpose of developing the writing. If I am trying to write an idea that I have or that has come to me, I might then do some research for maybe some keywords that would work. Like, let's say if I decide I want to write a Christmas song, it might be smart to put in some keywords that we all relate to that are Christmassy.
Can you think of
the gifts? Those might be some keywords that, while they're in a million other Christmas songs, you've got to think of a different angle for that.
Mm-hmm.
But
it's got to be especially tough to come up with a new Christmas song because there are so many of them.
Yeah, and that a Christmas song. They say you should have a Christmas song and a summer song in your catalog, and those are two that I keep jotting down ideas for, but I haven't gone ahead and written yet.
Do you find yourself writing mostly words first?
In terms of writing lyrics before a melody?
Yes.
I wouldn't say mostly. I depending upon the circumstance, I write in all different ways. If I'm in a workshop and it's for writing a lyric, then I would write the lyric first. Mm-hmm. It's a good way for me to perfect the lyric, but I've worked with artists who prefer to write the melody first, or have written a melody and their lyrics aren't very strong, and so they ask me to remove all their lyrics and just come up with a whole fresh lyric for their melody. I've worked with people that in the same room we're developing it together. In that case, I usually go back later and try to make some of the lyrics even stronger if I can.
Sure.
sometimes ideas come to me in the middle of the night, late at night, and that might not be when I'm in the middle of a writing session, so I always try to leave a little room for that. And sometimes it's always, there's no one way that I write. And I specifically made sure I was trained to do always, because in the beginning, I was only trained to write a lyric first for many years. And then I thought, well, that might not be the opportunity that comes up. I need to be trained for any potential opportunity that comes up. So eventually I ended up doing it all different ways.
It's so interesting because my first and long time training or work, as you might call it, was with, as you well know, Frank Wildhorn, and there was almost never a word first. It was always music first, and that's what drove everything. And sometimes that not only drove the music, but drove me crazy because it didn't always work well that way. But that was how we did it. And so there, as you well know, there are lots of different ways to come at it. And I think it's great that you have spent time developing your craft to go in many different directions so you can be flexible.
Yeah, there's not really a lot of options for lyricists. So in terms of being called on, I think people want people that play instruments, or they want people that can perform, but there's not a big calling, I think, for just a lyricist. Mm-hmm. So I thought it was in my best interest to be flexible and learn how to do it from every different way.
The craft
one of the things that when you and I had met when I had been involved in a musical theater workshop in L.A., mm-hmm. and that taught me a lot. We did what's called at the end of the year a mini musical, a 15-minute musical, and so you have such little time to develop it that basically I had to write lyrics on some first, and the composer had to write melody on some first, and then we'd swap. Mm-hmm. So I'd give him the lyric, he'd put the melody, and then he'd give me his melody, and I'd put a lyric to it. So that, in a way, was the beginning of my sort of training to be able to write to a melody. But for musical theater, you have to have a storyline that progresses. And you're right, if you're given a melody first, you might not have the room, lyrically, to progress that storyline. Right. So that could be a little challenging.
Right, and I just wanted to chime in that we're both friendly with New Musicals, Inc., formerly Academy of New Musical Theater, but now called New Musicals, Inc., and they're, for the audience's sake, they're a great organization. If you want to write new musicals, to at least check them out in Los Angeles, New Musicals, Inc. When you get an idea for a new song, does it just hit you out of the blue, or how do you get to whatever your new ideas are?
It depends on the circumstance. If I'm, let's say, in a workshop, sometimes there'll be an assignment. Okay, write a Christmas song, or write a song, or the instructor will pull something out of the headlines. Write a song about diversity, write a song about Me Too, or this movie that just came out doesn't have any music in it. If you had to write a closing credits song, what would the song be? To teach you how to not write specifically what the movie already said, but something relating to it. So in those instances, that's why I do like to continue taking workshops, because it gives you ideas of what to write about that I wouldn't normally just start writing about. Mm-hmm. When those aren't in session, if I'm given a melody, I was given a melody by Brian Bell for a song that didn't make the Weezer album. I didn't know that at the time. I didn't know who he was, and I'd never heard of Weezer. I later found this out.
That's a really cool thing that happened for you then, because it happened, even though you weren't looking for it, it happened in an organic way.
Yes, very much so.
And those are usually, I think those usually turn out to be the best kinds of ways to go about writing, when it feels organic, when it just is natural.
Yeah, and that's hard to come by, because
yes.
If you're not writing for a specific person or an artist that you can maybe do some research on, or see what songs they've sung and maybe try to do something a little different, or know about their life story. If I wrote about somebody, happily married with kids, and somebody's single, they're not going to sing the song. So sometimes you need to, if you can, if you're writing for a bigger artist, or you have an idea of something you'd want to pitch to a bigger artist that could maybe work for other people, you might try to stay away from, if somebody's going through a divorce, you don't want to write about a happy, being in love. So, or you might write it, but maybe they won't sing it.
Mm-hmm. And let's talk about collaboration for a moment, because clearly you are not a composer. You always are collaborating with somebody. And What is it about collaboration that, for you, makes it work? Can you identify that?
That's like asking what makes a date work.
Uh-huh.
When you're looking for a husband or wife.
Yes.
It's a very organic thing that I don't have a verbal answer to.
Mm-hmm.
It either feels right and it goes along right, or ultimately it's not a good match. It's like dating. And when you find a good collaborator that works well with you creatively, and also I've learned it's important for them to work well with you on a business level as well. That's hard to find, because you might marry somebody who would make a great husband, but not necessarily be a great father, And so if you're writing with somebody that's really creative, but they just don't want to know, don't care to know,
right,
or just are not good at the business end of things, that's not necessarily a good partner.
Well, there's no question that a good collaboration is like a good marriage or relationship, and it has a lot of the ups and downs and quirks to it. When you are starting to work on a piece of music or a lyric, do you have a regular routine that you use in developing it, or does everything come differently?
Everything kind of comes differently because it depends on the circumstance. Like I said, if I'm just sitting down to write a lyric for me, hoping to get it out there one day and create a demo and find a composer that will put a good melody to it, and I'm only focusing on the lyric and the quality of the lyric, I tend to rewrite a lot, and I don't put pressure on myself for a deadline. I just want to make sure it's great, and sometimes it could be quite a while until I finish it and to my satisfaction. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it comes quickly, and I have a great chorus, but then it takes me a while to build the storyline around it. So every time it's different. I try to, when I'm not in writing mode, because I do take writing breaks in between, I do try to at least keep my ears open and my eyes open, and if I hear a great phrase, or sometimes I'm speaking to a friend and something comes out of my mouth and he'll say, "Oh, that's a good line," and I'll jot it down. But I'm not listening for it. He's listening for it because he's also a songwriter. And he makes me crazy because every time we have a conversation, that happens 10 times in the conversation. And I just want to talk. I'm not looking to write a lyric in that conversation. So it's funny that I tend to sometimes talk lyrically without knowing it.
Do you keep a notebook or something like that with you so that if you get an idea, you write it down?
Yes. I keep many notebooks, and I probably should create some kind of, thing online so that I have it, typed out in some kind of document. But I find it easier to look back at my notebooks and look at the handwriting rather than just a bunch of lines on a page that I might print out. But if I'm writing and I'm not home, then I don't have those books with me. So that's the only thing about that.
Do you when you're out and about, do you have some kind of a small pad with you?
Oh, well, I put it on my iPhone usually.
Got it.
I'll jot it down into an email, and then I'll just write lines in the subject matter, and then eventually enough lines will be written down, and I'll send myself the email, and then I'll transfer it to the notebook. I still like putting it in that notebook.
I once met a fellow who we got to talking, and he had some business interaction with Bob Dylan, and wow. he went to meet with Bob Dylan at his house, and during the conversation, Bob Dylan literally spaced out and wandered away in the middle of a conversation to go jot down ideas that hit him. So, wow. So I guess when the muse strikes, you better do something to record it.
Yes, because you won't remember it.
You won't remember.
And so many times I'll wake up in the middle of the night or early in the morning, and I'll have a great line, and then I'm like, I'll remember it later, and you do not remember it. No. You have to write it down.
No, I've gotten very good at jotting notes on a pad of paper in the dark in the middle of the night. I've gotten good at it because I'll wake up and I'll have an idea, and I'm not going to turn the light on, but I'll jot it down. And I've gotten good, and every once in a while I do that, and I have no idea what I've written.
Oh, well, that's why if you do it onto a phone, although the blue light of the phone will keep you awake.
Yeah, that's right.
Then at least it's on there. That happens though too. When I moved about 7 years ago from down the block, and when I was packing up my stuff, I found so many scraps of paper, and I put them all into a box, saying, when I move, I'll I'll take them all out and I'll jot them down. And I opened the box when I moved, and I'm like, these lines aren't very good. Why did I think they were worth writing down? So I still have some scraps of paper.
You were inspired at that moment.
Right.
But now it's not so inspiring anymore.
Or it could have been an idea. A lot of times when I'm in the middle of writing something, or if I'm writing something with an artist and I have the melody in my head already, I wake up in the middle of the night and that melody is playing in my head. My brain is absolutely working when I'm sleeping, when I've got that melody. More so than when I'm just working on a lyric. When I have that melody and I'm writing to a melody and I have to get the melody ingrained in my DNA so that I can come up with the words that'll work for the melody, that thing is drilling into my brain cells in the middle of the night. I wake up and I hear myself working on it.
Well, you're starting to hear it. You're starting to hear words in rhythm, and at a certain syncopation and beat, and so that's pounding into your brain at that point.
Right.
But
I don't know it until I wake up in the middle of the night and realize what's happening.
So when do you do anything to trigger inspirations? In other words, where do you find your song ideas, or do you work at getting ideas?
Yeah, I do. That's why I don't write lyrically every single day, and I take some breaks, sometimes for a few months. But in the course of those months, I am coming up with ideas. I'm jotting down lines. If I come up with something that I'm like, that would be a good title, I'll put a star next to it. Like I said, when Brian Bell gave me that melody, and I always had this idea to write this song, this line as a title, it fit his melody. If it didn't, then I would have written a different song. But there are certain phrases that I come up with that I think that would be a good song title. I don't know what the story's going to say, and I might not ever get to write it, but I'll jot it down and I'll think that's a good title.
Do you know? I know you must seek hooks, lyrical hooks.
Right.
Do you know a hook when you hear it?
When I'm trying to come up with one, or when I hear it on the radio?
Either way. Well, on the radio, it's pretty obvious. It should be if you're any kind of person who's been around lyric writing for a while. A hook is pretty easy to figure out. But I'm talking about when you're looking for a hook, or it just comes to you. Do you know when a line comes into your head, that's a great hook? Can you tell? I
can think it might be one, but whether or not when I sit down to write it, it will work all the way through for a complete song and keep making sense every time we get to it. And, might take me a while, or might not work, or it might work.
So what I'm gathering from you, which is interesting, is that you're both easily inspired, but you really work hard at this. It's not something that just breezes through your day. It's hard work.
It's funny. You hear all the time musicians when they're, or songwriters or artists when they're in talk shows, they say, "Oh, I wrote that in 10 minutes." And and it's funny. Even even Barry Manilow, the song Copacabana, which is his biggest hit, he said, "Oh, I wrote that in 15 minutes." But he will then say, "The Lyricist did not write that in 15 minutes. They gave me a melody." They gave me a lyric that was completely finished, and so I was able to write the melody in 15 minutes because it was written, in a way that a melody person could easily put a melody to it. Sometimes some people write a lot of words, and when you have a lot of words, that doesn't give a composer a lot of room to do anything other than put a note on those words,
right,
as opposed to having some breathing room where a singer can do something or emote or something. And so that's the difference, I think, when people are writing poetry versus a lyric. The lyric can't be too dense because then it will just be a lot of words. Although maybe in rap and hip-hop it can be. It should be, I guess. But
not always, not in every song, but certainly lots of rap or hip-hop is that way.
There's a lot of words, more words in those. And then one time I was working with John Grady, and he started the song and he gave me the melody, and I was terrified to start on this song. It came out great, but it took quite a while because as soon as I heard it, I loved the melody, but there was I could hear there's so many words. There was going to be so many words because there were so many notes where the words were going to go, and it took me a while to kind of embrace that. But when I first heard it, I loved the song, and I thought, oh, how am I going to make a story of that? There's just so many words. Which usually would be a luxury, because as a lyricist, you're always constricted that, if you're writing to a melody that, you may need 8 words, and it only gives you room for 3.
Right.
And you have to do an internal rhyme, and those are tough to write, but they're very satisfying when it's finished and it comes out well.
We should fill the audience in. Our young audience will not have any idea who Don Grady was, the late Don Grady, who was who we both, you knew him better than I did, but I certainly had spent a little time around Don. Don Grady was most famous for having been one of the 3 sons on My 3 Sons with Fred McMurray back in the 60s. But he was also a very fine songwriter, correct?
Yes, and he was also an original Mouseketeer with Annette Funicello.
Oh, that's right. That's correct. He was an original Mouseketeer. So he was actually a celebrity, although by the time you started to work with him, he was still a celebrity, but not in that big league of celebrity, correct?
He was a more nostalgic kind of a celebrity with the Mouseketeers and things like that, and My 3 Sons, and but he always wanted to be an artist and write songs, and he was doing that even on My 3 Sons. A lot of songs that Robbie, his character, would sing and play guitar and have a band, and there would be all kinds of different shows where he wrote those songs.
Is that right?
After he left, he released an album. I think it was like 1974 or something like that. And then he went on to become a composer for film and TV. And around the time I had met him, he was writing with Marty, writing a lot of songs for Disney. And when that was sort of slowing down, he, on his own, without telling anybody, decided that he wanted to do a jazz album of himself as an artist again. And he was just quietly on his own working on these songs. And at the time, I was helping him build a website, and he would send me some of his songs and ask me for lyrical feedback. And after a while, I would be rewriting this or suggesting that, and so he gave me credit on some of the songs, and then we went on to write a couple more together. And so that was one way, you end up writing with an artist. But that was the first album that he did since 1974.
Well, there is no one path to the way an artist proceeds in a career. They all have their own unique way, and as yours has been its own unique way. Do you, when you're thinking about work, do you think about you keep a certain audience in your mind? Do you write for an audience?
Depends on what the purpose of the song is. If I'm writing for the country market, if I'm writing for a dance song, those have audiences that like specific things. And if you listen to what's number one in those genres, you can get an idea what the public likes in those genres. If I'm writing for a specific artist, yes, I do keep the fans in mind. As a matter of fact, I believe that I'm not really writing for the artist. I believe I'm writing for the fans. And so it's interesting when I speak to artists and I explain that to them, that I'm not really writing for you. You're really writing for them. Because if you want them to come to see you and you want them to buy your albums and come back and keep listening, then they're the ones that have to be satisfied. So as a lyricist, I walk a fine line in that sense between making sure the fans want to hear something like that and making sure the artist wants to say something like that.
Right. And so do you ever think of a song lyric and start working on it, and there's nothing attached to it, no artist, no other composer?
Oh yeah,
nothing
all the time.
And
usually when I'm taking a workshop, just to keep my lyrical chops going.
Right.
And sometimes I'll use parts of those songs in songs that I am writing for projects. So there's no wasted writing, even if I'm writing something just to keep my brain lubricated, to lyrically, so that I don't, atrophy after not writing for a while. I'm always writing something, and I will use that at some project at some point.
That is a spectacularly valuable bit of information you just gave, that there is no wasted writing. It all contributes in some way, and you don't get better by not writing. You get better by writing more and more, no matter whether it works or not. And that's just a fact certain. It's a muscle. You have to keep exercising it one way or another. Okay, so I'm going to ask you a tough question that I ask a lot of artists on this show, And sometimes I get very useful answers, and sometimes I don't, and we'll see how you do with it.
Okay.
For you, what makes a good song good?
For me,
tough
as a
question.
listener or as a writer?
Either way. When you hear a song that's good, what makes it good for you? When you're writing with someone or you're writing lyrics, what for you makes it good? In other words, it's pretty easy to identify, I think, when something isn't good. I think it's easy to figure out something doesn't work. I think it's a lot harder to identify what makes something good. Do you know in your mind's eye what does?
Are you speaking lyrically or musically or the whole song?
All the above, any and all of the above, however you want to come at it.
There's only one answer for me for that, and that is if it makes me feel something.
Okay, good.
And so that could be feeling, sorrow in the event of a sad song. That could be feeling happy in the event of a happy song. If I feel something, or it moves me physically and emotionally, it's a good song.
Music is an interesting and odd thing, is it not? Music without words attached to it can move you in a purely emotional way. Yes. There's no intellect to it at all. It's pure emotion. And then you put words onto a song, and it will still move you emotionally, but the words can take it to a slightly different place, or maybe a largely different place. And so the role of lyrics is very important, but not critical to finding the emotion of a song, though usually it does. But songwriting in particular, lyric writing, songs, music, all of that, is particularly an emotional exercise, is it not?
Yes. That's why I tend to do my best writing very late in the middle of the night when the rest of the world is asleep.
And why is that? What is it about the middle of the night?
Well, there's two things. One, I think growing up I've always been more alert later in the day. That goes for my TV jobs. That goes for when I was a student. I used to fall asleep with books on my chest in sixth grade. I just am much more alert at night. And that doesn't mean I don't enjoy being awake in the morning in the early part of the day. It makes it for a very long day because I'm looking forward to the nighttime. But when I'm sitting and writing and I'm in writing mode, I could sit here from 9 in the morning until 2 in the morning and write and write and write. But the good stuff won't come until midnight, let's say. Now, if I started at midnight, I wouldn't have been digging through the dirt to get to the diamonds for those earlier hours that I would have spent earlier. So I can't just start late at night. I do have to start, hours before until some of the good stuff comes. And then sometimes I'm not thinking about something and something good comes. So it's hard to pinpoint one process. It comes in all different ways.
Well, sure. I would expect it to be that way, but sometimes there's a pattern to it, and you see things that are more one than the other. And you're saying later in the day for you is better.
Yeah.
Do you work better when you're tired?
Well, I'm not tired later in the day.
I see. You get
I get energized later in the day.
Got it.
So no, I don't work well when I'm tired. I'm tired in the morning, and that's why I don't think I'm all that creative in the early part of the day. I'll tell you a funny story. I had won this songwriting competition down in Nashville a few years ago, and the prize was judged by a number one hit writer, and he selected out of 500 songs, he selected a winner, and the prize was to go to Nashville and to write a song with the hit writer. And that was very, very exciting. And I won. He selected my song out of hundreds of songs to do a co-write with him. And so there's a 2-hour time difference in Nashville. So a few months later, I flew down to Nashville, and I flew down a week early because I wanted to try to get used to the time zone a little bit. And, in Nashville, they write at 10 a.m., 1 p.m. They write like 2-3 writing sessions a day. And so he wanted to schedule the writing session for 10 a.m. I said, I'm more of a night owl, and I'm coming from L.A. with the time difference, so a little bit later would be better if you can accommodate that. And he goes, sure, how's 11:30? And I thought, okay, I'm not going to push it later than that. So I said, great. So I'm all set. I fly to Nashville. I still can't get used to the time difference because I just 8 on LA time. And the night before the writing session, he texts me and he says, just confirming 11 a.m. tomorrow. And I thought, oh, I can't tell this pro writer, oh, sorry, I need an extra 30 minutes of sleep. So I said, sure, see you then. And, I lost out on that half hour. But he didn't originally schedule it for 11:30. But that pained me. In a way, it wouldn't pain anybody else.
And
we wrote 2 great songs in a very short period of time.
But,
so maybe I am creative in the morning. I don't know.
There you go. Do you think you work better when you work fast?
It depends on if I'm writing with somebody. If I'm writing with a Nashville pro who is so trained in writing quickly and well, then yes, that ups my game. If I'm by myself at 2 in the morning at home, then I don't necessarily feel that I'm going to write fast. It's what comes out, comes out.
Mm-hmm. So in other words, I think one of the lessons we're taking away from today's show is that there is no one way to do this for you, that there's no clear pattern other than you prefer to work a little later. You like to think your way through it as opposed to just having it jam out, although that happens too.
Right.
From this entire career that you've had up till now of writing songs, is there anything from the process up till now that you thought works really, really well that you want to always repeat?
The only thing that I standard I hold myself to is greatness, and that's a very tough level to reach.
Yes, it is.
But it's what I aspire to because, like I said, I'm competing with all these professional writers who have more connections and things like that. And the only thing I think in general and anything in life that will cut through that will cut through, being a female in an all-male world, let's say in sports or whatever situation somebody finds themselves in, the only thing that will cut through that is something really great. And so that's what I aspire to do. It's tough to reach, and it makes for a lot of rewriting, and a lot of rewriting very, very good lines that might have been good enough. But then you write a great line and think, oh, now I've got to go back and match that.
Mm-hmm.
I had that in the song I've been working on for quite a while. My collaborator is very patient. And he loved the lyric that I wrote. And then I came up with a really interesting first line, a new first line. And now I have to rewrite the lyric to match that really great first line. And I don't know that I'm going to be able to because it might not be, that line should be first. Maybe that line should come later so I can build to it. So the only standard I have is that if I'm going to spend money on a demo, it has to be as great as it can be, and it will have gone through a lot of feedback, and hopefully, it won't only be my decision that ultimately says it's finished. I'll give you an example. I was writing a song in my earlier years of writing when I wasn't as confident in knowing what might be good. And it was a song that I wrote that was inspired by my brother after he passed away.
Mm-hmm.
And I would bring the song once a year to a workshop and rewrite it, because each year I got a little better and I got a little better. And when in Marty's workshop, he will read the lyric and then discuss the song with the class. And so he starts to read the lyric for like the 8th year in a row, however many years it was. And after the first verse and first chorus, he stopped and he was extremely choked up. And I thought, I'm finished. I'm finished. And what I didn't know was that he had just found out that a very dear friend of his who had created this, you mentioned the songwriting scholarships from Concord Records and Barry Manilow that had won, he created those scholarships. He owned Concord Records, this guy, and Marty had just found out that the guy had cancer and it wasn't looking good. So when I say a song has to make me feel or make someone else feel, that's how I know it worked. And in that moment, I knew the song was done. And it was. And it went on to win the John Lennon Award and grand prizes. And I still haven't gotten it recorded yet, but it's a great song, and I I hope it will get recorded one day. But it went on to win several
wow.
big awards, and because I knew I hit the heart when that happened to him.
You'd hit the heart and also punched them very hard in the gut.
Yeah.
And when you do that, you probably are going to succeed wildly every time. That's really what it is. We've talked about this already a little bit in the show, but it's all about the heart and the gut, not the brain, the heart and
right.
the gut.
And that's when he said to me when he first met me, he said, "I knew you were smart, but I didn't know if you could get to the heart." That was his first impression until I worked with him more and he saw that I could.
Did you feel like at that moment you had sort of elevated into a different place?
Like I said, all these years go by and you still feel like you're sitting down and writing a song for the first time. That blank page is a great equalizer. And to me personally, I never feel that I've quite reached there. That's why I think that's what keeps me going and to keep striving to get better and to write a better song and accomplish different things.
I was going to say, Debra, I actually hope for your sake that you never get to that place, because that's what makes you continue to strive for greatness.
Right.
Because if you think you've arrived and you're now great, you're probably cooked.
Well, where do you go after that? You always
Exactly.
have to have some kind of goal to improve, and that's the great secret of life. You never really. It really is all a journey. And I wrote a song called "I've Already Won." It's not the destination that's the reason for the race.
Mm-hmm.
And it's I don't know that I knew that when I was writing it. Maybe I just sounded good. I don't remember, but it's certainly very true.
Have you? I know you've been a fan forever of Barry Manilow. Have you had a chance to ever chat with him about songwriting?
I haven't had a chance to chat with him about songwriting. I have met him a couple of times. They were very quick moments of meeting, and he and Concord Records had sponsored this scholarship for Marty's class at UCLA, and back then when I won it, and I found myself in a situation where I had gone to see him in Palm Springs. It was an AIDS benefit, and they forgot to tell me what table I was at, so I had to go back to the entrance of this golf course in the middle of the cocktail hour to find out what table I was at, and I hear clicking noises, and I turn around, and Barry was entering. Now, everybody else was already a mile into the golf course at their cocktail hour, but I had to go back to the entrance,
Yeah.
and so now I couldn't make my way back to the cocktail hour because he and his entourage were now walking down the pathway.
Right.
And there was a photographer walking in front of them, taking pictures as they walked, and so I was going to be in the background if I was on that path. So I had to kind of go off the path and just wait until they passed. And somehow the photographer ended up calling me into the photo. He later on says, when I asked him why he did that, he says, "I didn't. Barry motioned me to tell you to come into the photo." I don't know why that happened, but I ended up taking this photo with Barry. But as I quickly went to shake his hand, I just said, "Thank you for the scholarship." And he kind of didn't really know what I was talking about until I went into detail, and I just said, Concord Records, and, created a scholarship under your name, and I won it, and it's helping me be a better songwriter. And so that was a very, very, very quick thing that I remembered saying, but he probably wouldn't.
Well,
but it's pretty exciting, though.
Yeah, people like Barry Manilow, I assume, meet so many people in their lives. It's very hard to keep them all straight. What do you do to stay on target and on deadline? Do you have any particular tricks?
Stay awake as long as I can and write as much as I can until I pass out, pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
When there's a deadline, I don't love deadlines. I've learned to write to them, and I've written pretty well when I've done that. But, I prefer to take my time and make sure that everything is perfect. And you don't always have time when you're writing under deadline. That's why I do both. It's like I'll take on projects, but I'll also do writing on the side that's just for me until I reveal it and then try to get it out there.
So in other words, to stay on target and deadline for you when you're on a deadline is just nose to the grindstone.
Yeah. I mean, what other choice is there? You have a certain limited time to do something, and I work up until the last second until I feel I've done everything I can do within that time frame.
Do you ever do something like that and you walk away and you think, I didn't get there, I didn't get to what I wanted to do?
I don't, not that I can recall. I mean, that might have happened.
That's good.
But I do what in that if I really have to call out the big guns, I'll send something to Marty and I'll say, can you please take a look at this before I finalize it?
Right.
Just because I need a second pair of fresh eyes and I'm too close to it.
Right.
And he's always been very accommodating about that. So I will say that that pretty much any time an artist is going to record a song of mine, Marty has reviewed it, unbeknownst to the artist.
Wow. That's a nice backup plan.
Yeah, he's the best. He's been very crucial in my writing. And when I wanted to be a TV producer as a female growing up in Long Island years ago, there weren't very many of them, and there weren't many opportunities anyway. With 3 networks, and I kind of had to do a lot of proving myself right, and proving people wrong who didn't believe that I could do it. And in this case, he believed in me so much that I came at it from a different way. I had to prove him right rather than proving people wrong. Like, I'll show you, I'll become a producer. Well, when it comes to being a songwriter, I wanted to prove him right for investing all that time and energy into helping me be a better writer. And that's a scarier thing, because when somebody believes in you and you don't want to let them down, it's much scarier than if the person didn't believe in you in the first place and you didn't make it, you didn't lose anything. But if somebody believes in you and you disappoint them by not doing everything you can to get there, that to me was. But
what a wonderful thing you have to have that as to pushing you, as to inspiring you. That's, some people don't have that. I think that's a really great thing.
Yeah. Oh, I'm very lucky. I mean, I would not in any way, shape, or form be a songwriter, be a lyricist, be involved in music if not for Marty.
Mm-hmm. Well,
I just wouldn't. It wouldn't even have entered my mind.
That's a. I think that's a grand thing that you have that in your life. Again, not everybody has something like that, and that's very helpful for you, so you are lucky. Tell us about your workspace. Do you have a specific workspace you always work in?
When I lived in my last place, my workspace was, I had a desk that was from a child store from my very first apartment in New York City, which was a studio, so you had no room for anything. And that was a very, very tiny desk. And then, translate that to many years later, being in a 2-bedroom, which there was more room, but I just kept moving my furniture with me. And so my desk was always this little small kid's desk that I got at this children's store. And so I had a very, very little space on that desk between the computer and the printer and stuff. I had like 2 inches to work from, and I was very squished. And then about 7 years ago, I moved down the block and into a bigger place, and I finally got rid of the desk, and I bought a real adult desk, a really beautiful desk that I don't want to touch because I don't want to ruin the desk. So I work at my dining room table. Because I have more room in the dining room and the living room are one big room, so I have the TV there, and it's just a bigger space, as opposed to the little squished space I was in the little corner in my old little child's desk. But I might at some point get over to that other desk. I just have more room on the dining room table.
Is there anything?
So that's my workspace.
Is there anything that you need to have around you for inspiration? Is there anything in your workspace that is sitting there that's always facing you, or something you need?
Not in terms of anything superstitious. Mm-hmm. I have my laptop and I have my notebooks that I've jotted ideas down to. And if I'm starting something from scratch, like after I haven't written for a while, I'll go through the books. I'll go look through my books and see if there's a title or an idea that jumps out at me. And then I'll start with that. But other than those, I don't really have anything that I need.
Oh, that's great. We have been talking for close to an hour, and so we're coming toward the end of today's Story Beat. And we've been talking with the fabulous lyricist Debra Gussin. Debra, I'm wondering, you've spent time in the industry, in different phases of the industry, and you've clearly met a lot of people and done a lot of different things. Do you happen to have any kind of a funny, oddball, quirky, offbeat, weird, any kind of strange, interesting story that you can share with us?
Oh gosh, I probably do. I was thinking back to when you say oddball, quirky. I'm thinking back to my very early career in TV. My first job in TV was working at ABC Sports, and I had aspired, to be a producer, and that was my first gig. And what I used to do is go to work on some sporting events on the weekends. I would pay my way to work on a football game or a golf event or the U.S. Open, or and eventually my boss, who was a producer on Wide World of Sports, was promoted to coordinating producer of ABC's Wide World of Sports. He was just a regular producer in the sports department, and then he was running the show.
Not Rune Arledge.
Under Rune. I think Rune had been gone by then, but I think when he started out, Rune was still there.
Got it.
Anyway, one of these shows he was producing was the New York City Marathon, which was a 3-hour telecast. And that year, I guess all the big runners were out. They were injured, or they weren't running, or they were running somewhere else. And he had a 3-hour telecast to fill. And so it was decided that they would try to get some New York native celebrities to do a segment on, so they could roll tape in between the moments of the race. And I had recommended, being a long time, from the time I was a child, being a long time Barry Manilow fan, I said, well, what about Barry? He's the epitome of Brooklyn. He's from Brooklyn. My boss, it was all mostly men that I was working with, and my boss was like, no way. And so I badgered him, I guess, enough to, because he already said no, so I had nothing to lose, to where he finally said, go do what you want, and he didn't say no. So I said, oh, well, what do I do? And so I went home and I took out an album and I looked at it for his management company on the back of the album, and I called and I left a message thinking nobody's going to call me back, And a few days later, I was on my way to Chicago to work a horse race called the Arlington Million, and I'm on the way out the door and the phone rings and I answer it, and it was his tour manager. And he said, I'm meeting with Barry tomorrow and I will present this idea to him. And I thought, oh my God, So I go to Chicago, and oddly enough, there's a horse racing in the race called Manila, Manila, which I thought was pretty close to Manilow. So I thought maybe that's a good sign that it'll work out. So I put a bet on the horse, and the horse ended up winning. So I was really hoping that would work. And long story short, after the guy met with Barry, they said they would do it. And what I didn't know at the time, because this was before the internet and word got out, he was working on a new album, and he was working on a new song called Brooklyn Blues. And I thought, well, how coincidental is that? Because most of the marathon takes place in the borough of Brooklyn. And so long story short, they assigned a director to go to L.A. to shoot this video with Barry singing Brooklyn Blues. And I took some vacation days and paid my way to L.A. because I wanted to, see what happened. I had made this happen, and I thought, well, I really would love to, see the shoot happening. So we get there, and we meet with him briefly the day before to check the location. And that night, the shoot was the next day, and that night I get back to the hotel, and I get a message from the tour manager saying that apparently the song was cut down for time, and Barry hasn't heard it, and he needed to sing it the next day, and he needed to hear how it was cut down so he could sing it on the shoot. And I didn't know anything about this, but I had a visual memory of when we were leaving the location scout, the director putting an Ampex audio tape box in his briefcase.
Right.
And I'm thinking, maybe that's what that was. I didn't know. So I left a note on the director's door that night saying, Barry needs to hear this. It's now 11 o'clock at night, and I didn't know who the director was, but I left a note saying, Barry really needs to hear this. The manager called, and he needs to hear how you cut the song down so he could do the recording the next day. And I don't know, I might have put a little bit of, how could you treat Barry this way into the letter. Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. I don't remember.
Right.
But I know I was really upset and nervous as to what was going to happen. And so the next morning, I get a phone call from my boss from New York, and he says to me, you have a choice. You can either go to the World Series in 2 weeks, which I was planning to do, or you can stay in L.A. And so he was basically making me choose between going to the Barry shoot and going to the World Series.
Right.
And I'm thinking, well, for me, it was a no-brainer. Even though I was not involved in music and I still had aspirations to be a producer, I was already in L.A. I paid my way there. I didn't really quite understand at the time what was happening. But then I get to the shoot, and the director says, you're not to say a word or you will leave the room. So he might have taken some offense to me leaving a note on his door saying that Barry needed to hear the song. That's the only thing I can get from that. And I thought, okay. So I'm watching the whole thing set up, and he had 2 cameras, and one was on a wide shot of Barry at a keyboard, and the other monitor had a very tight shot of Barry's profile, which, he used to get called out for having a large nose.
Yeah.
And so I thought, but even if he didn't, the profile is not really the best shot of anybody. It just didn't look good. And I thought, I'm not allowed to say anything, otherwise the director's going to kick me out. So I had to sit there and watch Barry, getting the shot set up. He couldn't see the monitor. And I don't know if he saw, a contorted look on my face or not, but all of a sudden he says to the director, hey, can you turn the monitor around so I can see the shot? And I thought, thank God, because I didn't want to have to say something and then not be there for the shoot. And he turns the monitor around and he goes, can you change that shot? So they put it on a very nice, front shot of his face, and it came out great. And unbeknownst to me, this, sort of just dream of me meeting my, childhood idol, it turned out that a few months later the album came out, and that song was selected as the first single. And so they used the video that we shot for the New York City Marathon. His management company bought it after it aired on the Marathon, which is a one-time telecast. And this song, the video, ended up airing on MTV and VH1, and it became his single, and that was the video that they used to promote it.
That's pretty cool.
So,
you saved Barry Manilow from having a bad shot. I think that's pretty good.
I hope so. But he did a great job, and all was well. But I didn't really want to get, taken out of the room just for saying something.
No,
and
you prevailed just by being quiet, so that was fine.
Yeah.
So last question of the show. Do you have a solid piece of advice or a tip for those who are trying to make it into the business, or they're sort of in the business and trying to get to a higher level?
TV or songwriting?
I think songwriting is the better way to go, or whatever tip you might have.
Well, it depends on, the music industry has really changed since I got into it.
Sure
and
has.
It's just, I guess it's always been difficult, but it depends on if you're an artist and you can sing and get your songs out there. If you're strictly a writer, a songwriter, that's another avenue. But I think if you're writing songs, the best piece of advice I could give to anybody, regardless of what their method is and what their process is and how long it takes them and how much rewriting they do, be honest in the song. Make sure that lyric, if you're writing the lyric, has truth to it. That's the only way that other people are going to relate to it, and that it will come from an authentic place, is if it has truth to it. And I wouldn't sit down and write a hip hop song, because that's not my truth. That's not where I come from, and it's not my world. I can write a country song, but I don't necessarily be writing about the tailgate, because I didn't grow up going to tailgates down in Nashville or wherever.
Right.
So write what's authentic to you, at least starting out that way, for people to know your truth. I think that will, and even in co-writes and collaborations, that honesty and that truth will allow your co-writers to know you and to know what you can contribute and what you can contribute to their own writing that they don't necessarily have the expertise in. So that would be my best advice, is just come from a place of truth and work hard and keep going.
I think
that's the other secret, is just don't stop, because eventually other people will stop and you'll hopefully make your way. Just don't stop. Just keep going and find different opportunities for yourself.
Well, you certainly can't succeed if you're not trying. And I think that's your advice about truth is incredibly valuable, because you can't it can't be fake. It has to come from a real place. And I think that truth is true for all forms of art, not just songwriting. I think that great artists, whether they're painters or musicians or actors or directors or writers or whatever, have to come from a place of truth. I think that that's a very valuable piece of advice. So I thank you for saying that, and I thank you greatly for being on today's show, Debra. This has been really spectacularly wonderful information and advice for people who are trying to get through their way into the business.
Well, thank you. I hope I said something that maybe can inspire somebody the way I've been inspired by people that I've listened to, and that would be great. Even if one person said, hey, I learned something, then it was worth the time. It's always nice speaking to you anyway.
I think that it's that there's way more than one piece in there. I think there's lots. So thank you again. And so we've come to the end of today's Story Beat. If you like this podcast, please take a moment to give us a comment, rating, or review on whatever app or platform you're listening to. Your support helps us bring more great episodes to you. This podcast would not have been possible without the generous support of the Center for Media Innovation on the campus of Point Park University. Until next time, I'm Steve Cuden, and may all your stories be unforgettable.